Why women miss the man who loved them the most after it ends. Psychology tricks. You don't really lose the person who loved you hardest. You lose the chance you had to value them, and you let it slip through your fingers. And that's the part that haunts you. Because the pain isn't always the breakup itself. It's the late night clarity. The quiet moment where it hits you. I had something rare, and I treated it like it was replaceable. As Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And when someone shows you love with consistency, loyalty, and effort, you'd better recognize it while it's still in front of you. Now listen, before we go deeper, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is here to help you see the truth clearly about yourself, about love, and about the games people don't admit they're playing. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. All right, let's continue. Here's what most men never get told about female psychology and regret. A woman doesn't always miss you the moment you leave. Sometimes she feels relief first. Relief that the tension is gone. Relief that the arguing stopped. Relief that she finally chose herself. But regret? Regret is slower. Regret arrives when the noise dies down and reality shows up. It hits when she meets men who give attention but not leadership. Men who flirt but don't protect. Men who talk big but don't stay consistent. And then she remembers you. Not just your words. Your presence. The way you showed up when it mattered. The way you tried, again and again, even when you weren't appreciated. That's when she misses the man who loved her the most. Not because you were perfect, but because your love was real, and real love is hard to replace once it's gone. 1. Regret is delayed, not immediate. Regret is delayed, not immediate, and that detail matters more than most men ever realize, because when a relationship ends, the absence doesn't scream, it whispers, and at first it even feels like relief, like freedom, like the right decision. And that's why so many women walk away convinced they've lost nothing, because it doesn't hurt the day you leave, it doesn't hurt the week after, and sometimes it doesn't hurt for months. But don't confuse silence with peace, because real understanding arrives later, always later, when time has done its quiet work and comparison begins its ruthless audit, when she's sitting across from someone new who checks the boxes but doesn't check her soul, when she's being pursued but not truly seen. When she's laughing but feels a strange hollowness underneath it, and that's when it hits, not as drama, not as panic, but as weight, the heavy realization that something rare slipped through her hands without making a sound. Don't assume she forgets you quickly. Be clear about this. Female psychology doesn't process loss the way men expect it to, because while men often feel the pain immediately, women tend to feel it later, after the emotions settle and the mind starts connecting patterns, after the excitement fades and reality replaces novelty, and that's when regret grows teeth. You see, she doesn't miss you because you were perfect. She misses you because you were consistent, present, emotionally available in a way that's almost invisible while it's there and painfully obvious once it's gone, because you didn't just desire her. You chose her, and choice leaves a deeper imprint than attraction ever could. That is the part most men underestimate. Don't think she regrets losing attention. She regrets losing safety. She regrets losing the man who loved her without needing to perform, the man who showed up when there was nothing to gain, the man who knew how to fall in love not as a game, but as a commitment. And here's the cruel irony of female psychology. The love that feels stable can feel boring in the moment, but becomes priceless in hindsight because excitement fades fast, while emotional security ages like gold. That's why the regret isn't immediate. It needs contrast. It needs time. It needs her to experience conversations that don't go deep, affection that feels conditional, presence that disappears when things get inconvenient. That's when memory reframes you, not as someone she left, but as someone she lost. Don't romanticize this. Be grounded. This isn't about revenge or satisfaction. This is about understanding psychology tricks that govern human attachment, because people rarely miss what was flashy. They miss what was solid, and you were solid in a world obsessed with stimulation. That is why she didn't recognize your value at first. Value that doesn't demand attention often gets overlooked. Be honest with yourself. You didn't lose her because you lacked something. You lost her because you offered something she wasn't ready to understand yet. And that understanding only arrives after life humbles comparison. That's when she realizes the new man listens but doesn't hear, touches but doesn't connect, shows interest but not devotion, and suddenly the memory of how you looked at her, how you noticed small changes, how you stayed when it was easier to leave, becomes sharp and unavoidable. Don't chase validation from this outcome. You must not wait for her regret to define your worth. Her regret is not your reward. Your reward is knowing that you loved fully, honestly, and without manipulation, which is rare enough that it leaves a permanent psychological imprint. That is one of the most overlooked psychology tricks in relationships. Genuine love creates delayed impact. It doesn't explode. It echoes. And once that echo starts, it doesn't stop easily. This is how female psychology works when attachment is real. She doesn't miss you when she's distracted. She misses you when she's calm. She misses you when life slows down and there's no noise left to hide behind. She misses you when she realizes how hard it is to find a man who knows how to fall in love without trying to control, impress, or perform. So don't shrink yourself to be remembered faster. Be yourself fully and walk forward. That is what makes the memory powerful. That is what turns absence into clarity. That is what makes regret inevitable, even if it arrives late, quietly, and without an apology. 2. Why she misses you later. Let's be honest about something. Most women don't miss the man immediately. They miss him later. Not when the door closes. Not when the breakup speech ends. Not even when the silence first arrives. It happens later, when the noise fades and the world gets quiet again. When the validation runs dry. When the options that once looked exciting stop feeling like opportunities and start feeling like distractions. When the thrill wears off and what's left is a strange, unsettling emptiness. That's when your name quietly returns to her mind, not as a fantasy, but as a question she can't shake. Don't misunderstand this moment. This isn't nostalgia. This is contrast. This is female psychology at work, replaying experiences side by side. That's when she's scrolling at 2 o'clock in the morning, phone glowing in a dark room, wondering what you're doing, who you're with, if you ever think about her, if you've moved on. And the truth is, you probably have. Because men who truly loved don't sit around waiting for someone to finally recognize their worth. They move differently. They heal differently. They rebuild differently. That is the quiet power of a high-value man. Be clear about this. She doesn't miss you because you chased her. She misses you because you didn't need to. You showed up with calm certainty. You brought masculine energy that didn't demand attention, didn't beg for reassurance, didn't panic when things felt uncertain. That kind of presence feels subtle in the moment, but unforgettable in hindsight. Don't confuse loud attraction with lasting impact. Loud fades. Grounded stays. That is how men who attract women without forcing anything leave a permanent mark. Here's the part most men never hear. While you were with her, your consistency felt normal. Your loyalty felt expected. Your emotional steadiness felt safe, almost invisible. But once you're gone, those qualities become rare overnight. Suddenly she's dealing with men who are charming but inconsistent, confident but unreliable, exciting but emotionally unavailable. And that's when the comparison begins. Not consciously at first. Quietly. Slowly. Relentlessly. That's when she realizes how different it felt to be chosen every day, not just desired in the moment. Don't think this regret shows up as drama. It shows up as restlessness, as checking her phone for messages that never arrive, as dates that feel flat even when they look good on paper, as laughter that sounds right but feels wrong. That's when memory reframes you, not as the man I left, but as the man who loved me when he didn't have to. That realization doesn't scream. It sinks. And once it sinks, it doesn't leave easily. Be grounded here. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about waiting for her to come back. A high-value man doesn't build his life around someone else's regret. He builds himself. He understands that masculine energy is quiet confidence, not emotional control. It's knowing when to stay and knowing when to walk away without burning bridges or begging for validation. That's why you moved on. That's why you healed. That's why you rebuilt. And that forward motion is exactly what makes the memory of you stronger, not weaker. Don't shrink yourself to be remembered sooner. Be solid so you're remembered deeper. The men who attract women long term aren't the ones who perform. They're the ones who are consistent in character. They know who they are. They know what they offer. And they don't negotiate their self-respect. That is what female psychology responds to over time, even if it doesn't recognize it immediately. You must understand this clearly. She misses you later because later is when truth shows up. Later is when excitement is gone and substance matters. Later is when love is measured not by sparks, but by stability. And by then, you're no longer waiting. You're living. You're building. You're becoming more of the man you were always meant to be. That's the final irony. The moment she truly understands your value is the moment you no longer need her to. And if this hit home, do this right now. Drop a comment that says, I move forward. I don't wait to be remembered. Because here's the truth. She doesn't miss you when you're chasing. She misses you when you're gone, grounded, and rebuilding a life she no longer has access to. That's power. Quiet power. Like this video if you're choosing self-respect over nostalgia. Subscribe for more unshakable wisdom. And remember this every day. The man who truly loved doesn't wait to be missed. He moves on, and that's when he becomes unforgettable. 3. The love she took for granted. The love she took for granted was never small, never loud, never begging for applause. It was the rare kind that shows up without announcement and stays without conditions. And you gave her exactly that, the real thing. Loyalty that didn't waver when life got heavy. Consistency that didn't disappear when the excitement cooled. Presence that didn't need reminders. Effort that didn't come with ultimatums. The kind of love that doesn't perform every 5 minutes to prove its worth, but stands solid in silence and action, day after day, without games, without tricks, without manipulation, just truth. And that truth is exactly why it was overlooked, because many people are not trained to recognize peace when they see it. They are trained to recognize intensity, noise, emotional spikes, chaos mistaken for chemistry, and drama mislabeled as passion. And as the old saying goes, what is calm feels unfamiliar to those addicted to storms. And that is the psychology most men never understand until it's too late. Because when you offer stable love to someone who hasn't healed their inner turbulence, they don't feel safe. They feel bored. They feel confused. They feel like something is missing, when in reality nothing is wrong. And that's when the slow erosion begins. Not because you lacked value, but because you exceeded her emotional capacity at that stage of her life. And this is where Old Stoic wisdom quietly enters the room, reminding you that you cannot force appreciation, you cannot educate desire, and you cannot make someone value what they are not ready to hold. Because as Epictetus warned long ago, we suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgments about them. And her judgment wasn't about your worth. It was about her readiness, her conditioning, her unresolved patterns. And in modern life, this pattern is everywhere, amplified by dating apps, endless options, social media validation, and the illusion that something better is always one swipe away. So when a man shows up grounded, reliable, emotionally present, and steady, he is often misread as predictable instead of powerful, taken for granted instead of treasured. Because predictability scares those who live on emotional adrenaline. And yet here is the paradox that psychology confirms again and again. What is familiar becomes invisible until it is gone. And absence has a way of restoring clarity that presence never could. Because once you're no longer there, once the texts stop, once the check-ins disappear, once the quiet strength that held the relationship together is removed, the emotional system recalibrates. And suddenly the noise she chased feels empty. The excitement feels unstable. The chaos feels exhausting. And that's when memory does its work, selectively highlighting what was lost. Not what was boring, not what felt too calm at the time, but what was dependable, what was safe, what was real. And this is why women often miss the man who loved them the most only after it ends. Not because they enjoy regret, but because clarity often arrives late. And Marcus Aurelius put it plainly when he said, "You never lose anything that truly belongs to you. And what belonged to her was the experience of being loved without conditions. Something rare, something not easily replaced, something that becomes obvious only when it's no longer available. And here is where instruction matters. Because this is not a story about waiting to be missed. It is not about hoping she realizes your value someday. It is about understanding the mechanism so you never shrink yourself to be digestible again. Because a man with an iron mind does not chase validation from those who couldn't see him when he stood right in front of them. He does not rewrite his nature to fit someone else's emotional limitations. He does not bargain with his standards. And he certainly does not confuse being overlooked with being unworthy. Because Stoicism Win is not about emotional withdrawal. It is about emotional mastery. It is about loving deeply without attachment to outcome. It is about giving fully while remaining sovereign. And modern psychology aligns perfectly with this ancient framework, showing us that people often value what requires effort to regain more than what required effort to maintain. And that doesn't mean you should be distant or unavailable. It means you should never overinvest where reciprocity is absent. Because love is not proven through sacrifice alone. It is proven through mutual appreciation. And when appreciation is missing, the correct response is not more effort. It is alignment. And this is where men fail. Because they double down when they should stand still. They explain when they should observe. They give more when they should give space. And in doing so, they teach others how to treat them. And the moment you stop teaching someone that you will always be there no matter how little they value you, the dynamic shifts. Because as Viktor Frankl observed, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And changing yourself does not mean becoming colder. It means becoming clearer, stronger, more selective, more grounded. And this clarity is what lingers after you're gone. This is what creates the echo. Because the man who loved her the most did not love recklessly. He loved responsibly. He did not overwhelm. He stabilized. He did not demand. He provided. And when that stabilizing force disappears, the nervous system notices. The emotional body notices. The silence becomes loud. And that is when nostalgia begins rewriting history, turning what once felt ordinary into something rare. And yet the lesson here is not to wait for regret to validate you. The lesson is to internalize this truth now. Your value is not determined by immediate recognition. And if someone needs to lose you to understand you, that understanding comes too late to matter. Because a man guided by Old Stoic wisdom does not return to places where he was tolerated instead of cherished. He builds forward. He channels the same loyalty, consistency, presence, and effort into a life that reflects his standards, into work that matters, into health that lasts, into purpose that anchors him. And this is how Stoicism Win manifests in real life, not as detachment, but as disciplined direction. Because women don't miss the man who begged. They miss the man who stood firm without resentment. They miss the man who gave freely without self-abandonment. They miss the man who walked away without bitterness. And this is why the iron mind matters. Because without it, memory becomes a trap, regret becomes a hook, and longing becomes a loop. But with it, experience becomes wisdom, loss becomes refinement, and heartbreak becomes clarity. And if you're listening to this now, understand the instruction clearly. Never dilute your love to keep someone comfortable. Never perform to be chosen. Never confuse chaos for connection. And never chase someone who only recognizes your worth in hindsight. Because the man who loved her the most is not defined by who misses him later. He is defined by who he becomes next. And that is mastery. That is victory. That is the quiet power of Stoicism Win, forged through Old Stoic wisdom, reinforced by an iron mind, and lived unapologetically in the modern world. 4. Why You Walking Away Changed Everything. Here's the truth you were never told, and it's the reason why women miss the man who loved them the most after it ends. When she let you go and you walked away with your dignity intact, something powerful shifted beneath the surface, something quiet but irreversible. Because you didn't beg, you didn't chase, you didn't perform desperation, you didn't shrink yourself to stay relevant. You simply accepted reality and stepped back, and in that moment you did what most men never do. You gave her the freedom she thought she wanted. And that freedom felt good at first, light even, but then the silence crept in because she expected resistance. She expected bargaining. She expected you to prove your value by fighting for her attention. And when none of that happened, her mind didn't relax, it spiraled. Because female psychology doesn't respond to what is handed over easily. It responds to contrast, to absence, to the sudden loss of emotional certainty. And that's where the real psychology tricks begin to work without you lifting a finger. Don't chase someone who chose uncertainty over you. Don't explain your worth. Don't argue with her decision. Be calm. Be still. Be grounded. Because the moment you stopped chasing was the moment she started thinking. And thinking turns into remembering, and remembering turns into comparison, because now every man she meets is unconsciously measured against the one who walked away without bitterness, the one who loved deeply but refused to abandon self-respect. And that contrast is brutal because she remembers how safe she felt, how consistent you were, how you showed up without games, how you loved without conditions. And now she's surrounded by uncertainty she once romanticized. And the mind does a cruel thing. It rewrites the past with clarity once it's gone. And that's how regret is born, not through arguments or drama, but through silence and absence. That silence becomes loud. That absence becomes heavy. And she starts asking herself questions she avoided when you were there. Questions like, why didn't he fight for me? And the answer terrifies her because the answer is, he didn't need to. And that realization hits deeper than any emotional plea ever could, because real value doesn't chase, it withdraws. And in female psychology, withdrawal triggers reflection, and reflection triggers emotional attachment long after the relationship ends. Which is why psychology tricks that rely on manipulation never last, but dignity does. And this is where many men misunderstand how to fall in love the right way. They think love is proven by pursuit, by sacrifice without limits, by staying even when they're not chosen. But that's not love, that's self-erasure. And it never creates longing. It creates familiarity without respect. Be clear about this. Be decisive. Be grounded. Because when you walked away, you didn't punish her. You didn't try to teach her a lesson. You simply honored yourself. And that is the most unsettling thing for someone who expected control over your emotions, because now she's left with unanswered questions. And the human mind hates unanswered questions. It fills the gaps with emotion, and emotion fuels memory, and memory fuels longing, especially in female psychology, where emotional safety is often recognized only after it's gone. Don't misunderstand this as a tactic. Don't weaponize indifference. That is not the point. The point is authenticity, because women can sense the difference between strategy and truth, and only truth has staying power. Only genuine self-respect lingers in the mind. And that's why months later, sometimes years later, she thinks of you at random moments, not when she's lonely, but when she's with someone new and something feels off, when a conversation lacks depth, when consistency disappears, when effort fades. And suddenly she remembers the man who didn't need psychology tricks to be present, the man who knew how to fall in love without losing himself. And that memory creates emotional friction, because she realizes she lost something rare without realizing its value at the time. That's why walking away changed everything, because you didn't collapse, you didn't try to negotiate affection, you didn't ask for reassurance. You simply stepped back and let reality speak. And reality speaks loudest in silence, because absence forces reflection, and reflection reveals truth. And the truth is this: the man who loved her the most is the man she no longer has access to. And the mind always wants what it cannot reclaim. Don't go back to prove a point. Don't reopen doors out of nostalgia. Be steady. Be disciplined. Be emotionally sovereign. Because the paradox of love in female psychology is that it often arrives late, after certainty is gone, after comfort is removed, after the man has already chosen himself. And that's not tragedy, that's alignment. Because love that requires self-abandonment was never meant to last, and love that respects boundaries leaves a mark that time cannot erase. So understand this clearly: walking away wasn't weakness. It was strength. It wasn't loss. It was transformation. And whether she ever reaches out or not is irrelevant, because the moment you chose dignity over chasing, you reclaimed your power. And that power is felt long after you're gone, because psychology tricks fade, but character echoes. Female psychology remembers presence. And the man who knows how to fall in love without begging is the man who is never truly forgotten. If this message hit home, don't just scroll past it. Like this video, subscribe for more grounded wisdom, and share it with a man who needs this reminder today. And to lock this lesson into your mind, drop this comment below right now. I walk away with dignity. Silence speaks louder than chasing. 5. What she realizes after you're gone. What she realizes after you're gone doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives quietly, patiently, and then all at the same time, because absence has a way of turning background details into foreground truths. And the first thing she notices is not the dramatic moments, but the small, consistent ones she once took for granted. The good morning messages that came without reminders, the way you remembered details she forgot she told you. The calm presence that made her feel secure without performance or pressure, the way you didn't demand perfection, but valued presence, effort, and honesty. And now that steady foundation is gone, replaced by noise, options, and surface-level attention, because modern dating doesn't lack messages or matches, it lacks meaning. And she begins to see the difference when she finds herself surrounded by men who offer excitement without stability, compliments without consistency, desire without depth, attention without direction, men who show up intensely and disappear just as fast, men who treat connection like a game rather than a responsibility. And in that contrast, your value becomes clear, because value is rarely recognized in real time. It's recognized in comparison. And this is where psychology and Old Stoic wisdom intersect, because as Marcus Aurelius reminded us, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. And your absence becomes the teacher that clarity couldn't provide while you were present, because when you were there, your effort blended into normalcy, and when you left, normalcy vanished, leaving her with the realization that what felt ordinary was actually rare. And this is why women often miss the man who loved them the most only after it ends, not because they didn't care before, but because appreciation requires contrast, and contrast requires loss. And in today's world of endless choices, people confuse availability with replaceability until they learn the hard way that not everything meaningful can be replaced, because devotion is not common, emotional safety is not standard, and consistency is not guaranteed. And this is where your instruction begins, if you are listening closely, because this is not about regret or revenge. This is about understanding leverage, understanding timing, and understanding self-mastery. Because the man who leaves with dignity, who does not plead, who does not argue his value, who does not try to remain relevant in her life after choosing to walk away, becomes unforgettable precisely because he does not chase his memory. He allows it to work for him. And as Seneca said, it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And what she begins to feel is not loneliness, but contrast, because she still receives messages, still gets dates, still gets attention. But attention is not presence, desire is not safety, and chemistry is not commitment. And slowly she recognizes that the man who truly loved her gave something the others cannot replicate: peace, steadiness, and direction. And this is why Stoicism Win is not a slogan but a framework, because when you live with restraint, discipline, and emotional control, you leave behind an imprint that chaos cannot erase. And the iron mind you cultivate by refusing to beg, refusing to chase validation, and refusing to stay where your value is questioned becomes the very thing that separates you from the noise. Because modern life rewards those who react quickly but remembers those who remain grounded. And this is why your instruction is simple but uncompromising. Do not stay where you are tolerated instead of respected. Do not over-explain your intentions. Do not negotiate for appreciation. Because the man who loved deeply but knew when to leave teaches the most powerful lesson of all, that love without self-respect is not love, but sacrifice without meaning. And when she looks back, she doesn't miss the gifts or the dates or the words. She misses how she felt in your presence, calm, chosen, safe, and understood. And psychology confirms this because the nervous system remembers regulation, not excitement. And when she moves from you to men who bring stimulation without stability, her body recognizes the difference even if her mind resists it, because as Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And what becomes conscious to her is that the man who walked away without bitterness, without manipulation, and without desperation was operating from strength, not strategy. And this is the part most men misunderstand, because they think being remembered requires effort after the ending, when in reality it requires restraint, because silence paired with self-respect speaks louder than explanation. And this is where Old Stoic wisdom becomes practical instruction, because the Stoics understood that attachment to outcomes destroys clarity, and when you release the need to be chosen, you become unforgettable, not by force, but by contrast. And this is how you master life rather than react to it, because mastery is not control over others, it is control over yourself. And the iron mind you build through discipline ensures that whether she returns or not is irrelevant to your progress, because your life continues, your standards remain intact, and your direction stays firm. And paradoxically, this is what causes reflection, because when she sees you thriving rather than watching, building rather than waiting, and moving forward rather than hovering, the memory of who you were sharpens rather than fades. Because the man who loved sincerely and left cleanly becomes a reference point, not an option. And that reference point follows her into future connections, where she unconsciously compares effort, presence, and emotional depth, and realizes that what she once had was not common. And this is the victory you must internalize, not over her, but over the version of yourself that would have stayed too long, explained too much, or accepted less than he deserved. Because as Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. And what you must be is calm, self-directed, and grounded, living Stoicism when not as philosophy, but as daily practice, because the man who becomes unforgettable does not try to be remembered. He becomes irreplaceable by the way he lives, the way he leaves, and the standards he never abandons. And this is why women miss the man who loved them the most only after it ends, because his absence reveals his value, his silence reinforces his strength, and his continued growth confirms what they didn't fully see when comfort made clarity unnecessary. And your final instruction is this: do not measure your worth by who regrets losing you. Measure it by who you become when you refuse to lose yourself, because the iron mind you forge through discipline, restraint, and self-respect ensures that whether she looks back or not, you move forward stronger, clearer, and victorious, guided by Old Stoic wisdom, grounded in Stoicism Win, and anchored in a life that no longer depends on being chosen to feel complete. 6. The difference between moving on and looking back. Men move on, not because they forget, not because they didn't care, but because they understand something essential about life that most people only learn too late. Staying stuck costs more than leaving with dignity. Men heal. They don't heal by pretending it didn't hurt. They heal by facing the pain, absorbing the lesson, and refusing to let the past define their future. Healing is not avoidance. Healing is integration. That is strength. And when a man truly heals, he doesn't return to what broke him. He doesn't circle back to prove a point. He doesn't wait around hoping someone finally realizes his worth. He keeps moving forward. That is what separates a high-value man from everyone else. He doesn't need closure from another person. He creates it within himself. Over time, he finds someone who sees his value without needing a lesson first. Someone who doesn't need to lose him to appreciate him. Someone who doesn't require contrast to recognize consistency. Someone who meets his effort instead of questioning it. And that is the moment everything shifts. Because that's when she realizes she had the right man at the wrong time in her life. Or maybe it wasn't the wrong time at all. Maybe it was the right time, and she simply wasn't awake enough to see it. Either way, the outcome is the same. She looks back. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Not with regret written across her face. It happens quietly. She notices patterns. She compares energy. She measures effort without meaning to. And slowly, She understands the difference between men who want attention and a man who offered presence. She misses you. Not the version of you she created in her head. Not the edited memory. Not the fantasy she reshaped after you were gone. She misses the actual you. The man who showed up consistently. The man who listened instead of performed. The man who made her feel safe without trying to impress. The man who didn't play games because he didn't need to. That kind of masculine energy doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself over time. And its absence is loud. This is something psychology confirms again and again. People rarely recognize emotional safety while they are receiving it. They recognize it when it's gone. Because modern dating is full of stimulation, but short on steadiness. Full of excitement, but empty of grounding. Full of attention, but lacking devotion. She may receive more messages now, more compliments, more invitations, but none of it feels the same. Because attention fades. Validation fluctuates. Consistency is rare. And when she encounters men who are charming but unreliable, confident but inconsistent, exciting but directionless, something clicks. She understands what she lost. Not because you disappeared, but because you didn't chase. That is where most men get it wrong. They think being missed requires staying visible. They think value comes from reminding someone what they offered. They think silence equals loss. It doesn't. Silence, when paired with self-respect, becomes contrast. And contrast creates clarity. A high-value man doesn't punish. He doesn't lecture. He doesn't linger. He moves forward. And that forward motion does something powerful. It removes him from comparison. Now she isn't choosing between you and someone else. She's comparing everyone else to you. That's when the memory sharpens instead of fades. Because the mind remembers how you made her feel. Calm, seen, secure, understood. You didn't need to prove yourself. You didn't need to convince. You didn't need to push. You were present. That was enough. And when that presence disappears, it leaves a vacuum that surface-level connections can't fill. This is where men must listen carefully. Don't confuse moving on with forgetting. Don't confuse healing with indifference. Don't confuse strength with coldness. Moving on means you respect yourself enough not to stay where your value is questioned. Healing means you take responsibility for your growth instead of waiting for validation. Strength means you allow someone to feel the consequence of your absence without interference. That is how you attract women without chasing them. Not through tactics, not through manipulation, but through alignment. Women don't miss men who beg. They don't miss men who linger. They don't miss men who orbit. They miss men who had direction. They miss men who stood firm. They miss men who left cleanly. This is why masculine energy is felt most strongly after it's gone. Because it doesn't demand attention. It commands respect. And when you move on authentically, your life improves. Your posture changes. Your focus sharpens. Your standards rise. You become calmer, clearer, more selective. That's when you truly attract women, not just interest, but alignment. And here's the truth many men need to hear. Whether she comes back or not is irrelevant. Because the goal was never to be missed. The goal was to become the man who doesn't need to be remembered to know his worth. A high-value man doesn't measure himself by regret left behind. He measures himself by the life he builds moving forward. If she looks back, that's her realization. If she doesn't, that's still your victory. Because you chose growth over attachment, direction over distraction, self-respect over validation. Be the man who moves on with purpose. Be the man who heals without bitterness. Be the man who understands that love without self-respect is not love. It's self-abandonment. That is the difference between moving on and looking back. She looks back. You move forward. And that difference changes everything. 7. When she reaches out and your response matters. When she reaches out, and she will, it often looks harmless on the surface. A casual message, a late-night hey, a like on an old photo, a comment that feels accidental but isn't. And you must understand this clearly. This moment is not about romance, not about closure, not about rekindling something that already ran its course. It is about power, self-respect, and awareness. Because from the lens of female psychology, these small gestures are rarely random. They're emotional feelers. Quiet checks to see if the man who once loved deeply is still emotionally available, still open, still reachable. And this is where most men lose the plot, by responding too quickly, too warmly, too eagerly, thinking it shows maturity or kindness. But don't confuse availability with value. Don't mistake politeness for strength. Psychology tricks don't work the way movies taught you. They work through absence, contrast, and emotional memory. And when a relationship ends, what lingers isn't the arguments or the stress. It's how you made her feel when things were calm, safe, and real. That is why women often miss the man who loved them the most after it ends. Not immediately, not when distractions are loud, but later when silence arrives and emotional comparison begins. Because female psychology is deeply rooted in emotional contrast. She doesn't miss you when another man is exciting. She misses you when another man is inconsistent. She doesn't miss you when attention is plentiful. She misses you when emotional depth is missing. And when she reaches out, she's often responding to that internal gap, that quiet realization that genuine presence is rare. And this is where your response matters. Not to her, but to you. Because how you respond defines whether you remain the man she remembers with respect or the man she revisits out of convenience. And you must be honest with yourself here. Don't reply from nostalgia. Don't reply from loneliness. Don't reply hoping this is a sign. Because if she truly wanted to return with clarity, she wouldn't test, she would state. She wouldn't hover, she would step forward. And psychology tricks become dangerous when you use them unconsciously against yourself, chasing validation instead of protecting dignity. Because the truth is this: the man women miss the most is not the man who begged, explained, or stayed emotionally exposed after the ending. It's the man who loved fully when he was there and stood firmly when it was over. The man who didn't weaponize silence, but used it to heal. The man who didn't disappear to provoke, but withdrew to grow. And this ties directly into how to fall in love properly in the first place. Because love that leaves an imprint is love that is grounded, calm, and self-contained, not anxious, not performative, not dependent. And when you respond to her reach out with neutrality, clarity, and calm respect, something powerful happens beneath the surface. You reinforce the emotional memory of you as stable and composed. And female psychology responds strongly to that contrast. Because most emotional connections fail not from lack of affection, but from lack of emotional regulation. And here's the part most men don't want to hear. You don't know her access just because you shared a past. You don't know her emotional reassurance just because she feels nostalgic. And you must stop seeing every reach out as an opportunity and start seeing it as information. Information about where she is emotionally and where you stand internally. Because if her message stirs anxiety, hope, or urgency in you, that is your signal to pause, not proceed. That is your cue to regain balance before engaging. And don't underestimate how much this restraint reshapes perception. Because psychology tricks only work when they align with authenticity. And authenticity here means acting from self-respect, not strategy. And the irony is this: when you stop trying to influence how she feels, when you stop trying to guide the outcome, you often become the man she reflects on most. Because emotional maturity is rare, and rarity creates value. And this is where how to fall in love becomes a lesson in how to let go. Because real love doesn't cling. It allows space. And real strength doesn't react impulsively. It responds intentionally. And when she notices that your energy is no longer reactive, no longer available on demand, no longer emotionally negotiable, the emotional narrative shifts inside her. Because female psychology is sensitive to emotional leadership, not control, but steadiness. And steadiness is built when a man knows when to speak and when to remain composed, when to care and when to step back. And if she truly misses you, not the comfort, not the familiarity, but you, your grounded presence will surface naturally, without prompting, without manipulation, without psychology tricks used as tactics. Because the deepest influence is never forced. It is felt. And you must remember this above all: the man women miss the most after it ends is the man who didn't lose himself trying to be remembered. He became unforgettable by choosing himself, by honoring the ending, by respecting the silence, and by understanding that love remembered is shaped less by words exchanged after the breakup and more by the dignity maintained once it was over. So don't rush. Don't over-explain. Don't reopen doors that closed for a reason. Be calm. Be brief. Be respectful. That is not distance. That is strength. And strength, when paired with emotional depth, is what leaves the longest echo in the mind and heart. So let her miss you. Let her carry that weight. Let her learn the lesson in her own time. Because your job isn't to teach her. Your job isn't to wait around hoping she finally understands. Your job is to keep becoming the man you're meant to be. The man who loves deeply but never loses himself. The man who commits fully but never compromises his standards. The man who knows when to walk away and doesn't look back with regret. That's who you are now. That's who you're becoming. And the right woman will see that without needing to lose you first. She'll protect it. She'll honor it. She'll match it. And when you finally find her, everything will make sense. You'll understand why everyone before her had to fall away. They were preparing you, teaching you, showing you what you don't want, so you'd recognize what you do want when it finally shows up. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button right now. More truth is coming your way. Don't miss what's next. Take care of yourself, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next video.